Deliberations, let's deliberate, everyone. It's time to deliberate and introduce our first session for this year's summit. Can we really end food waste, and why can't we afford not to? Australia's at a vital point in our journey towards ending food waste. 6 years have passed since the launch of the National Food Waste Strategy, and we've got 6 years remaining to achieve the ambitious target of halving it by 2030. To guide us through this discussion, we have an esteemed lineup of speakers who will share their insights on the scale of opportunity, the progress we've made, and of course, what still needs to be done. First, we have Dr. Steven Lapidge, the CEO of End Food Waste Australia. With extensive experience in food waste research and innovation, Dr. Lapidge will provide an overview of the current state of food waste in Australia and globally, and discuss the cutting-edge solutions being developed to tackle this issue. He'll also launch their new strategy on how they will work towards achieving our 2030 goal and beyond. Following Steven, we will hear from Brianna, CEO of Foodbank Australia, who will provide an in-depth look at hunger in Australia and the food rescue action that's making a real impact. Then we will have Toine Timmermans. Damn it. Sorry. I practiced this last night, sorry. I mean, I get some crackers with Georgiades, but Toine Timmermans. Was that all right? I owe you one. Director of Food Waste Free United in the Netherlands, who will discuss international efforts and collaborations reducing food waste and emissions, and Dana Gunders, Executive Director of ReFed in the United States. She'll be joining us virtually to share a global perspective on food waste reduction and the very real economic opportunities. Each of these leaders brings a wealth of knowledge and experience from different corners of the globe, making this an insightful and engaging session. They're going to return after each of the presentations for a Q&A, and of course, submit your questions to the QR code on the table for the event app, where you'll be able to put whatever it is you want asked. So first up, let's welcome Dr. Steven Lapidge to stage to get things started as we explore the vital question, can we really end food waste? Steven, welcome.
Thanks, Costa. Welcome, everyone. Who's excited? Let's fire up, all right? We've got 2 days ahead and we want to keep the energy levels really high. The Brisbane Summit 18 months ago was just one of the best events I've ever been to. Maybe I'm a bit biased, but that's the intensity levels that we want for the next 2 days. We want to everyone to leave here with a really clear picture around how they personally and how their organisations can really help achieve this target of halving food waste. So, it's going to be a little bit interactive, if you don't mind. Bit of show of hands. Who was here in November 2017 for the launch of the National Food Waste Strategy? About 100 metres away. So there's a couple of dozen people in the room. Well, I'm going to take you on a journey from that particular day. So in November 2017, the National Food Waste Strategy was launched here at the Melbourne Convention Centre by Minister Josh Frydenberg. And at that time, the CRC was going through the bidding process, and that was an 18-month process. The Fight Food Waste CRC commenced in July 1, 2018, and we released this strategic plan shortly after in our first year. And I'm sure many people remember the interlock carrots. Yes? Yeah, still love that image. In that strategic plan, we had a strategy on a page which looked like this. And it was very clear. We will use the CRC as a foundation from which to build a much bigger organisation, because we knew that the CRC by itself could never achieve the target of halving food waste alone. It was always going to be our foundation, and we want to make that foundation as strong as possible. So we always said that we would be looking to build on that through delivering future initiatives. The campaign was specifically called out in there, and we are really looking forward to launching that later this year. But there's a range of other activities in there, and we have built from the CRC in recent years to the point that the CRC is no longer our primary source of funding. We actually receive just as much funding, if not more, from the Department of Environment, and we thank the Minister Plibersek and the Food Waste team, some of which are online, some of which are in the room, for their strong support, as well as the CRC program. Within that strategic plan, we gave an indication of where we thought we would be in 2024. And that's pretty much where we are now. So as I'll show over the next few slides, we believe on all our modelling and all our efforts so far that by 2030, we will have reduced food waste by about a third, or will be a third of the way to the target. And that was based on CRC activities and the additional areas that we've grown over the last couple of years. But we've still got a long way to go before we can achieve that target of halving food waste in Australia. And what this talk and what this strategic plan that we're about to launch is about is how we are going to get there as an organisation and as a country, because none of us can do it do it alone. So in terms of how have we achieved that third reduction so far? So if we look at our achievements over the last 6 years as an organisation, we have 57 grant agreement milestones, and we're a bit over halfway as an organisation, and we are on track, very much on track, to deliver the CRC as the grant agreement indicates. And we are also on track to deliver 6 out of 7 of our impact targets. Now, we are a bit different as a CRC in that every project maps to those impact targets right from the start. And so we have a pretty clear picture of what the CRC is going to deliver. And it's great that we are on track with so many of those very, very big, audacious targets. We have completed 44 projects. We've got over 150 scientific publications. You can see the figures there. I won't go through all of them. But I guess the key thing to take away is that we are a little bit behind on our R&D expenditure. So if you've got projects that are unavoidable waste streams that you want to work out the highest value use for, please come and talk to us before the end of the conference or in the months after, because we still have additional leverage available, dollar for dollar matching, that you can use to help de-risk and reduce the cost of your innovation pipeline. And we still have about $20 million in new projects in our pipeline. Of course, we've built from the CRC, and we now have the industry action area, which was formerly known as Stop Food Waste Australia. And before that, it was known as the National Food Waste Governance Entity. So no wonder many people in this room were confused about our name and organisation and so on. And hopefully the rebrand to End Food Waste Australia has made that much clearer. So in terms of those targets, we are at 38 signatories to the Australian Food Pact. We are at, shortly we'll have 10 published sector action plans, and a figure the Minister mentioned before is 190 million meals donated to food rescue just in the last couple of years by our Australian Food Pact signatories, which is a massive figure, and $60 million in money saved by our partners. More recently, we've been developing the nationwide consumer behaviour change campaign, and we really look forward to launching that later this year. We've got seed funding of $10 million to get that campaign going, but we need everyone involved in that because it only works if it's amplified and has a consistent message right throughout Australia as much as possible. And we look forward to continuing that campaign out to 2030 if at all possible. And the fourth area that we've been working on is around the policy area. And you'll hear one example around food donation tax incentives, which Brianna will talk about later on. And it's great to see our first piece of policy introduced to Federal Parliament only a few weeks ago, because that can make a huge difference. So, on to the launch of the End Food Waste Strategic Business Plan. We have made great achievements over our first 6 years, but we've still got a long way to go. I will just touch on some of the headline figures around why we are doing this. 3.7 million households in Australia effectively the population of Sydney and Melbourne are food insecure. In a country that produces enough food to feed 75 million people, that's just a situation we should not have, and it's something that we all need to address. The average family still wastes around $2,500 worth of food each year, despite a cost of living crisis that is going on at the moment, and around $20 billion of food is wasted by Australian families. That's something we can address. That is a modern phenomenon in many ways. That's hard to say with a dry mouth, I've got to say. In the industry profitability area, we currently waste the equivalent of $36 billion worth of food. Now that's just the economic figure. Not factored into that is the social cost of food insecurity or the environmental cost in dollar terms of what that food waste rotting in landfill actually creates. The actual figure would probably be closer to $100 billion. And some of the other figures here is around just the value that we can create from activities such as the Australian Food Pack. Around $1.2 billion by the end of the CRC if we can expand it in the way we hope, which is about really tripling the size. And in regards to the planet, around 10% of greenhouse gas emissions generated globally are from food waste rotting in landfill. And again, that is something we can address. We also waste an area the size of Victoria growing food that we go on to waste. Again, just an incredibly alarming statistic. So, onto our strategy on a page for End Food Waste Australia. And the format here may look familiar. We've taken the format from the previous strategy and expanded on that. So we are starting from a target of $37 billion of food waste in Australia each year, probably a little bit higher than that at the moment, given that was a 2021 figure. And the projection around what we will need to halve to achieve the National Food Waste Strategy is 9.2 million tonnes in the year 2030. So the National Food Waste Strategy is around halving per capita food waste. So at 9.2 million tonnes, it's 312, it's 156 kilograms per person for a projected population of around 30 million. So 4.6 million tonnes is what we're aiming at in the year 2030, and I'll show you how we're tracking against that shortly. What we've achieved so far as an organisation, we believe is in the order of 1.4 million tonnes by the year 2030. So there's not 1.4 million tonnes of food waste in a pile somewhere that we directly saved. This is our projections of what will occur in the year 2030, and it's all about the year 2030. And over the last 6 years, since that announcement with the National Food Waste Strategy a couple of metres away, we have become one of the world's largest public-private partnerships in food waste. And I'm really proud of that Australia has really started 10 years behind many of the other countries around the world, but we are now one of the largest and we're really catching up quickly on the rest of the world. And that's something I think we should all be proud of. Within here, I won't go through all of them, but you can see our main priorities. It's to deliver the End Food Waste CRC as per the grant agreement and make sure we deliver or exceed all our targets there. It's to expand the Australian Food Pack. About triple the size, we believe, is that sweet spot of being able to achieve maximum impact without the costs getting too high. We want to implement the 10 existing sector action plans and deliver a further 10, which really targets the remaining hotspots of food waste in the country from the National Food Waste Feasibility Study. We want to deliver an enduring behaviour change campaign. It can't just be a short campaign, it's got to be out till 2030. And we need to pull more policy levers because they can really move much greater volumes of food waste than some of the R&D, individual company R&D activities. So there's a whole collection of priorities that we believe we can use to halve food waste by 2030, or at least get most of the way there. So 4.6 million is our target. We believe, given these activities, we can achieve another 2.5 million tonne reduction by 2030 and get to about 85% of the target. And then we recognise that many of our partners in this room are doing a whole range of activities that also contribute to that target that we may not be counting in our food waste totals. And that is around 15% of the national target, we believe. But together as a country, we can get to the halving food waste target. There are our priorities again, which is from our strategy on a page, and I won't go into them again. But this is what it looks like in terms of the volumes. So 1.4 is what we believe we will achieve by 2030 if we do nothing else. 2.5 is what we believe we can achieve as further enhancing our activities and over the next 6 years. And there's about 0.7 million tonnes that we believe as a country they will be delivered by others. So we can get to that target of 4.6 million tonnes. What it will take though is, from a bottom-up budget approach, $135 million in new investment in End Food Waste Australia activities and partner activities. Most of that would go to the behaviour change campaign and enhancing the industry action pillar, so sector action plans and the Australian Food Pact. So yes, it's a large figure, but it's certainly less than the $2 billion figure that the National Food Waste Feasibility Study indicated a couple of years ago. And when we break it down into an approach of a split funding model, we do believe it's achievable, and we have started that process around discussing that with potential funders. If you are interested in being part of this, please come and talk to me over the next couple of days. Of course, we cannot do anything or achieve any volume reduction without our partners. And this is an ever-growing list of partners. We started with around 60 partners in the CRC. We've nearly doubled that over the last few years, and we hope to double that again. And just before I finish, when I started this CRC the idea for it, it actually came out of the National Food and Nutrition Strategy back in 2015. At that time, Australia was worried around where we sat on the global sustainability index in terms of our food production. The Economist published this about every 3 years. At the time, we weren't doing so well, which is why we were wanting to look at things like food waste as a country, because that can help increase our sustainability. So we were mid-tier in the second quartile. Not a great position to be. Last time I checked, in the 2021 the Global Food Sustainability Index is that we had increased dramatically. We are now around 7th in the world on overall performance, but most of that gain had come from the increase in performance of food loss and waste. And why this is a country result, not just an organisation result. Again, I think it's something we've really got to be proud of. It is being noticed what we're doing in Australia. You're all part of it, and we've all got to continue this because I think we should be aiming for number 1. Of course, the news is not all good, and unfortunately, we still have the second highest levels of household food waste in the world. And that's something that the nationwide consumer behaviour change campaign, which will launch later this year, will really help to address. So I will leave it there. The End Food Waste Strategic Business Plan is officially launched. You've got a QR code on your table that you can download the electronic copy of that, and there are strategies on a page that will be outside when you head out as well. I really want everyone to join us on this journey over the next 6 years. I think we are probably one of the few countries, and we'll hear a bit more from Toine on this, we are probably one of the few countries that can still achieve that target of halving food waste. So get on board. Thank you. Next, I would like to welcome up Brianna Casey. Brianna has been on this journey with me for a long time, probably even longer, and she was part of our original bid for the CRC, which was held in Canberra, and our advisory panel. Brianna, it's great to have you back. Thank you.
Good morning. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you all and to be joining on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I would like to extend my respects and to really acknowledge what a great job Perry did, not only to welcome us to country, but to give us real context for why we're here and why it's so important to respect the land and waters that we are meeting on today. It has been, as Steve suggested, a really long time coming that we've been focused on what we can do best in Australia to halve per capita food loss and waste in Australia. We've got a pretty shameful record, if we're honest. I know we can brag about a lot of the stuff that we've just seen on stage, and it's been extraordinary. But there's some pretty shameful statistics up there that we need to be really honest about, because you're going to hear a lot of numbers. There are a lot of numbers already this morning. Behind every one of those numbers is a person, is a loved one, is a family member, is a member of our communities that's got a story to tell. And they might be doing extraordinary things in terms of people and planet, and Costa talked about that real importance around community. But there are also people in our communities who are hurting right now, and they're hurting more than they ever have before. And I really want to acknowledge there's a number of food bankers in the room this morning. I saw Greg Pattinson from Foodbank South Australia and NT. I know Katie Fisher's here from Foodbank Victoria. Both Sarah and Taylor are here from Foodbank Australia, and my wonderful colleagues as well from Second Bite and Oz Harvest. We are united and passionate to the point of probably being annoying about how much we want to halve per capita food loss and waste in Australia and why we need to do it. And you've seen some of the statistics already this morning, but I really want to highlight the fact that despite the fact we produce enough food in this country to feed our population three times over, we've got 3.7 million households across Australia experiencing food insecurity. We are rapidly approaching a situation where 50% of Australian households know what food insecurity is because they've been touched by it themselves. And food insecurity is a spectrum. It can range from feeling anxious and worried about whether or not you've got enough money in the household budget to put a meal on the table, right through to making impossible choices and ultimate compromises and sacrifices on the type of food you're eating or whether you're eating at all. And that's a growing reality in Australia right now. We hear these stories every day. We meet these fellow community members each and every day. And they're probably not who you think. They are increasingly younger. They are in full employment. In fact, for many, they're in multiple job holdings. These are people who are working full-time throughout the day, coming home, bathing their children, tucking them into bed, and then working another 3, 4, 5 hours in the gig economy, because the original income level in the household just won't sustain where we're at in terms of expenses at the moment. We've got to do better by those in Australia who are hurting right now, and the fact that we have so many people and a growing number of households going hungry while we are wasting so much food to becoming second in the world in terms of household food waste, not good enough. Let's have a think about where this food loss and waste is happening. And the great thing about being in the food rescue and food relief game is we know this stuff intimately because we chase it down hard. We work from paddock to plate. We work with farmers, we work with retailers, we work with manufacturers, transport and logistics companies to identify where there is leakiness in our food systems. Where is there surplus? Where is there products that don't look quite right but are still delicious and nutritious? Where are there products that we can chase culturally appropriate food and make sure it ends up in the households of those who need it? So we know we've got food loss and waste happening upstream, so this is inside the farm gate, it's in the processing sector, it's in distribution, but also downstream. It's happening in retail, households, hospitality, and in our institutions. And we've seen already where this huge leakiness is happening in terms of households. And it's happening right across every category. But at Foodbank, we've got a real focus on upstream. Where can we best identify where food loss and waste is happening? How can we work in partnership with growers, with farmers, with manufacturers to identify where those products are? And then how can we work with the transport and logistics companies out there to capture that product, to bring it into food bank warehouses and to distribute it right across Australia? We know that when we can focus on upstream, we have fewer touch points to deal with. We know that we can collect in larger volumes. It's no surprise to many who've heard me speak before, we don't talk about food supply chains at Foodbank, we talk about food surprise chains. We don't know where we're going to identify food loss and waste day in, day out. but it might be a B-double of watermelons one day, it might be a truckload of nappies the next, you name it, we will take it, because if it is nutritious and culturally appropriate, we want to be able to find a home for those products. We want to focus on products that have got a longer shelf life and less spoilage, and we want to focus on businesses where there's formal quality control and commercially driven outcomes. And one of the areas that we know there is huge untapped potential is in horticulture. We know that we've got a number of sector action plans already in place, and I commend each and every one of you who's been involved in those, because we can't do this on our own. None of us can. And by bringing the sectors together, whether that be around the food rescue sector action plan, horticulture, you name the commodity, we know there are opportunities for us to do so much more in not only identifying where food loss and waste lives, but making sure we can give it a home. But we've got some challenges in doing that. We know that we need to balance the sort of products that we are seeking. As a food relief organisation, Foodbank isn't you get what you get and you don't get upset. We are keenly focused on fresh produce, on dairy, on being able to provide the most nutritious and culturally appropriate offering. Because if you are doing it tough right now and you are struggling to feed yourselves and your families, you're probably making some pretty significant sacrifices on your diet. And if we can assist by addressing even 2 of the big commodities that drop off the shopping list, if we know from our research and the Foodbank Hunger Report each year, the first 2 products to drop off the shopping list when times are tough, fresh produce and protein. What are the long-term health implications when we're not providing those products to families? Unlocking transport and logistics solutions is a huge focus for us right now. We've got a huge country, we produce enough to feed ourselves 3 times over, so why is food loss and waste happening? And the challenge we have is that a lot of those products that we need more of, that fresh produce, the dairy, the protein, tend to be chilled products, tend to be products that are really costly to move around the country. And it's why we're so grateful for all of our transport and logistics partners who provide pro bono and low bono support to be able to move those products around, because the worst possible outcome is to see those products end up in landfill. We want to expand the capacity of the collection network so we can actually focus on what's coming in. But we know that businesses need to be profitable and they need to be incentivised to be able to do the right thing and to be able to make these huge contributions. And one of the proudest achievements we have, and as I said, we've been involved in supporting the Fight Food Waste CRC from the beginning. I was on the original bid committee. I've seen this from when Steve doggedly chased a dream to the situation we are in now, where we are on target to hit 2030 with some really braggable achievements. But we won't be able to do that without some really significant interventions. And we identified almost a decade ago that without tax incentives in our regulatory framework here in Australia, there is no incentive for farmers, for growers, for manufacturers, for transport and logistics companies to donate to food rescue. Sure, they do it because they're great humans and they feel warm and fuzzy about it, but financially, there's been no incentive to do it. We have been pushing and using Senate inquiries and House of Representatives inquiries and media and communications and direct advocacy and working in partnership with industry to develop a business case. And I really want to thank Steve and the team, because it's been a really strong effort in bringing together a proposal that we could take to government that made sense, that was costed and would show us great outcomes. And I'm really proud to say that only a couple of weeks ago, Senator Dean Smith from Western Australia introduced a bill in the Senate to introduce a national food waste tax incentive. This is the game changer we've been waiting for. This is going to unlock more food and groceries than we've ever seen before. It has the potential to unlock an additional 100 million meals a year by 2030. That's a huge number of meals that are going to help us in our mission to get more food to hungry people, but it's also going to reduce a huge amount of food loss. It's that game changer that we needed. But we know there are regulatory headwinds that are making it harder. We've got some real challenges at the moment around food safety, where we've got government departments who are caught up in bureaucracy, who are wanting to stop us from stopping the clock and being able to extend the lives of food. They're not wanting to allow us to freeze meat before its use-by date to be able to distribute beyond. We need to make sure we think about all of the unintended consequences when regulation, which is well intended, can have unfortunate outcomes. Because for me, if we can get more protein to families who need it, then that's a big win. So thank you to each and every one of you who's been involved in helping us really advocate for significant change. Thank you for what you're doing on farm, in our food supply chains and surprise chains. But I really want to be honest, we've got a lot more work to do yet, and we're really excited to be doing it with you. Thank you.
So we've heard about the people side from Brianna, we've heard about the planet side from Toine. Now we're going to hear about the profit side from a great colleague in America, Dana Gunders. Dana is Executive Director of ReFed in the USA, and ReFed started their life as an economic think tank. And so I couldn't think of anyone better to talk about the profit drivers of reducing food waste. So will the gods of virtual conferencing work for us? Dana, are you there?
I think you can, because I worked with your tech team. So I will say hello, everyone. Wonderful to be with you. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person. As Steve said, my name is Dana Gunders. I'm the Executive Director of ReFed. We are a national nonprofit in the US. That is focused on really 4 areas. One is providing data and insights on food loss and waste. The second is catalyzing more capital and innovation within the space. Third, building out business initiatives with the food industry here. And lastly, really bringing people together for collective impact and connecting everyone. We are primarily focused on the US, and we are entirely focused on reducing the amount of food that goes to waste. Here we go. So just a quick snapshot for the US. We have, a similar problem. 38% of all food goes uneaten here. It's worth about $473 billion, being the big country that we are, and at the same time have about 44 million Americans who are food insecure. When we look at that by value, only about 2% of that surplus food is donated. We have about 7% that's being recycled, and the rest is going to those waste destinations of landfill, incineration, sewer, and other. And as to where it's happening for us, it is also the biggest chunk is happening in homes. We estimate that about $250 billion worth of food is going to waste in people's homes. That winds up being a pretty similar number to what I heard Steven say earlier, a little bit over $2,500 for a 4-person household here. And you can see that, we consumer-facing businesses down below, we break it out to retail and restaurants are a significant portion as well. And farms. And what we've done at ReFed is really try to provide a model that can help people identify solutions. And I like to say we like to take them from, we can't take everyone from A to Z on action, but we can take them from, A to maybe L to really understand the problem, explore solutions, find who can help provide those solutions, and then give people some calculators that help to calculate impact, to track investment in the space, and to know what policies are out there. So I don't have time to go through all of those, but I did want to show you kind of the economic analysis that we have done related to solutions. So we've identified about 80 different solutions. I don't expect that you can read this slide, but just to give you a sense, we've only been able to model about 42 of those 80, and to try to give it some digestibility, we divided into 7 categories. And then for the ones we've been able to model, we actually analyze, how much does it cost to implement the solution? How much money can be saved, or perhaps revenue gained from a solution? How much food is saved? What are the climate and water impacts? Are there additional meals provided, and even job impacts? And we do this for all 42 of our solutions. And if you go onto our insight engine, you can kind of filter around depending on what you care about. You can see it across our whole food system, or you can see it by ton. depending on how you want to analyze it. And you can even, for each of those solutions, go in and get a little more information via a fact sheet that will show you, some of that information and more of the costs by different stakeholders. We also, if you look there on the bottom right, for each solution, we not only estimate how much investment is required, but where that money should come from. So should it be coming from government grants or maybe internal corporate spend? And we put that all together. And when we look at the whole US food system over a 10-year time period, because when we first did this, 2030 was 10 years away, and we still found it to make sense to use a 10-year kind of time frame, we estimate that it would take about $18 billion in investment annually to achieve, if we were to implement all 42 of those solutions entirely. And that is a big number, but it also has a return of about $78 billion in terms of net financial benefit, in addition to all of those benefits that you can see on the right, including almost 60,000 jobs. Most of those jobs are created in the composting and anaerobic digestion solutions, but there are some certainly in food rescue and food donation, and then just in all of the businesses that are really sprouting in the prevention side as well. Now, this with recently the U.S. aligned with the international definition of cutting food loss and waste in half. So before in the U.S. we were actually counting composting and anaerobic digestion as part of the solution. Now we're counting it as part of the pile of wasted food that needs to be cut in half. And with that change, that our kind of solutions model no longer gets us to a 50% reduction. I think it's more like a 24% reduction if we were to implement all of this right now. But again, back to the economics, when we look at that, where is that money going to come from? And we've found that about over a third of it needs to come from the food industry itself, right? Spending money on, upgrading their software or putting sensors into their cold storage or whatever it is. But all of these solutions that really just kind of require an internal spend by the food industry is the biggest portion. There's about, $4 billion in there that are estimated to be what we call kind of impact first investments. $5 billion. And that is, grants from government, grants from philanthropy, and impact first investments that we see as necessary to really kind of take away the bottlenecks and help to really catalyze the innovation that will then allow others to invest later and allow those solutions to be available to the industry. With our analysis, we also are moving into providing custom analytics for companies, because while that food system-wide solution analysis is important for certain folks like policymakers, it's not as helpful for an individual business. And so we've taken some of the intel inside of the model and turned it into something where if we receive data from a company, we can turn around and give them kind of custom analytics back on the solutions and how well they will work for them, but also to benchmark them against others in the industry. And we found that to be particularly useful for some of the voluntary agreements that we have. We actually have two separate ones right now in the US. One has been going on about 5 years. It's the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment, and that's everything on the West Coast. So it's California, Oregon, Washington, and several of the cities within there are the public entities. And then we have over half of the retail market share participating in the grocery sector. And now we've added food service, and other companies are continuing to join. The US Food Waste Pact was just launched this past December at COP28 and is quickly growing and but really in the process of establishing itself. Many of the companies that were part of the West Coast project have now joined the Food Waste Pact, but then other companies who weren't on the West Coast are now able to be part of that as well. So we have Amazon, we have Walmart, we have some of the biggest food companies in the country that are already participating. And we're really excited to see where that goes. And we're especially excited because this year was really the first year that we were able to show real progress from our West Coast project. So after 4 years of reporting data to us from the retail sector, this past year when we got our 2022 data, because there's a little bit of a lag, we found that there was actually a 25% reduction in unsold food by grocers on the West Coast. So we were really excited to see that because that's that prevention that we're all looking for. And at the same time, actually the rate of food donation went up by 20% and the rate of composting went up. I know these lines on the right are a little bit confusing, but the rate of composting actually went up about 28%, I believe. So significant increases. But at the same time, because the overall pot had dropped, this is kind of interesting, and I think something for us all to know is that while donations increased 20% by rate, there actually was I think if you look at that bottom line, a 10% decrease in the actual amount of food, the volume of food that wound up being donated because that overall, pie, because of that prevention, had gotten smaller. But we also estimate some big cost savings, equivalent to $3.6 billion, or 3.6% of the annual food sales of the region. So excited to see that. And of course, greenhouse gas savings equivalent to about 600,000 cars annually. Just a few other notes from the US. We did not have a strategy announced 6 years ago like you guys. We actually just about a month ago, we're really excited to have the US government launch a national strategy for reducing food loss and waste. We're thrilled to see this out there. I think one of the things it does is actually start the works of a consumer campaign. So that's one of the most exciting new things that in there. It also, I would say, reprioritizes food loss and waste in many of the research programs, where it could be part of it for the government, but it isn't necessarily, right? And so we're hoping to see more grants flowing through that. And it also has a focus on recycling organics as well. And while the federal government is sort of just starting to come up with a strategy, we have seen a lot of action at the state level in the US. In the US, waste is really, the jurisdiction is at that state level. And so we have about 10 states that now have some kind of restriction or ban on organics going to landfills. We've also seen all sorts of other legislations, at least put forward in many of the states. And you can see on this slide that they range from things around animal feed to different donation and liability protection and incentives to more waste related things like waste bans. So quite a variety of policies that are being at least introduced in the US, certainly not all passed. And then on the investment side, this is our estimate of investment over the last 10 years or so. If you squint, you can see an upward trend, though certainly it really has varied by year. But we are excited that sort of you start 2019, we have seen kind of this slightly higher investment through the pandemic, and then the last year we've seen it go down kind of in line with investment in overall tech. So not a huge surprise. But I think one of my best indicators of progress has been this past year when I went to my daughter's school and I saw this sign that I had nothing to do with. I hadn't spoken to any of the teachers or anything. And there, as I was picking up my daughter, was this big sign that said, how can you help our planet reduce your food waste? And it talked about date labels, and it talked about freezing your food, and it talked about taking small portions. And it was really heartwarming to see something like this coming through. And I think to me, it just tells me that while we don't have a national campaign or anything yet, we are seeing awareness increase around the US and I think around the world as well. So I will leave you all with that there. Thank you so much for listening, and I can't wait to hear what comes out of your 2 days together.
Thank you, Dana. Can we keep Dana up on the screen there, please? And welcome the rest of the panel. Hopefully you can see us okay. Dana? I'll take that as yes. All right, so we've got a few questions here. I think this session was due to finish in about 10 minutes. We started about 10 minutes late. We might eat into a couple of minutes of your coffee time, but promise we won't keep you too long. I think there's some really important follow-up questions from the great talks that we've just seen. So first of all, I want to go to Brianna. Getting the food donation tax incentive into federal parliament has been a really long time coming, and long before us, I appreciate that. But tell me about recent activities with Oz Harvest and Second Bite and Senator Dean Smith. It's all been playing out on social media and so on. And what the next steps are, because most people don't get how long this process takes, I think.
I know, and I know that I'm a bit of a loser with no life because I really get excited about policy and legislation. But the long and short of what's happened is we had a press conference at Oz Harvest in Alexandria a few weeks ago with Senator Smith. So we had Second Bite, Oz Harvest and Foodbank presenting a whole of sector united voice around the critical importance of introducing this bill. And for those of you who are fascinated by politics, and why wouldn't you be, the interesting piece is it's really unusual to have legislation introduced in the Senate, and it's also really unusual to have legislation introduced by the opposition. So the critically important step here now is the bill has been presented in the Senate and it's been referred to committee. So there is now a Senate committee process underway looking into whether or not this bill is going to be effective, whether or not it will have the intended consequences of unlocking more food for food relief organisations and incentivising those actors in the supply chain to do more. But we're going to need submissions. We're going to need each of you to actually write a submission. It doesn't have to be hard. It could be as simple as writing a letter to the Senate saying, we think this is a terrific idea. We are ashamed of the amount of food loss and waste that happens in Australia, and we're excited about the prospect of this change and what it's going to mean for people and planet alike. Submissions close on the 20th of August. From there, a series of public hearings will be held. I will be shouting from the rooftops to anyone who will listen how critically important this is. And the hope is that that Senate committee will then recommend to the government that the bill be put. And if that happens, we will, for the first time in Australia's history, have incentives in our tax system to motivate those in the supply chain to donate not only food and grocery items, but also the transport and logistics and storage associated with moving those products around Australia. I will make sure through Steve that we have links available to the Australian Parliament House website. Please make a submission. Please, please, please. We are happy to provide support and guidance on how that can work. And please add your voice to our industry letter of support on why this is so important. It's really exciting. And I have to say, after almost a decade of advocating for it, to have it actually happening, it's extraordinary.
Yeah, excellent. I realised I have failed my task that I was asked to do as soon as I got up here, and I know there's a bunch of people standing up the back. There is seats down here. Please come and grab a seat. You don't want to be standing the whole time. And while we continue with some questions. All right. Toine, we met in 2015 at the OECD in Paris, and I asked you to become a non-executive director in 2017 at a Berlin G20 event, which for a finance person kind of sounds like something very exciting, but for a food waste, it was quite novel. What were your initial thoughts around why did you want to become involved in what Australia was doing? Country on the other side of the world.
Yeah, I remember both occasions quite well, especially in Berlin. You asked me to become a director in the board and help with making the plan. So that was, for me, a game changer. And I think it was like things coming together. At that time, I just finished working 5 years setting up a CRC program on sustainable food. So I knew, and you say, okay, we want to start with that, building on excellent science and move towards impact. And at that time, I was coordinator of the EU program Refresh. That's probably why you asked me. In where the basis was basically two things: get consumer activation and set up voluntary agreements in all countries in Europe, and see what are the key success factors for that. Expanding that model in Australia and starting more or less greenfield. It was like, this comes together. I couldn't say no. Actually, I had never been to Australia at that time, so that was like, okay, maybe a little bit far away, but there are like two other things, the non-executive part, so because I already had quite a busy job. And I think the second thing, and that's where we see that other EU countries don't make the progress they could have made, and that was lack of funding. And that's what you got. And you are proud now, and you should be proud telling like, we have the largest, let's say, voluntary agreement program in the world. And I don't say that money and funding is the most important, because there's so much benefits, but you need the seed funding, you need the coordination cost to be paid for, and the campaigning. And having that, it's what's like, this is a one-time opportunity. And look where you are now.
So 6 years later, many 5 a.m. and 6 a.m. starts for board meetings and committee meetings. Still enjoying it?
Yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't ask that live.
I'm not going to say no.
Yeah, I can't say no to that now, and it makes me proud of being giving my insight and knowledge. And I think what is unique, and I really believe that there's not one size fits all solutions. Yep. You're not copying what we have done. You're just using the things like, okay, this could be part of our next step, but it needs to be made here. You need to work with the stakeholders here, with the government, with the industry, and see what fits and what are the type of coalitions we can set up here. And using the inspiration, but using what I always call the late mover advantage. So you start a little bit later, but you can learn. And I'm confident that on some ways we can learn from you, but on some things, you might still be able to learn some of the things we are setting up in the next stage. So I look forward to continue working with the organization and all the people here.
I know a question that the board has asked you, and I'm going to ask you, and it's not necessarily an easy one, but let's get it out there. What can we be doing better as a country?
I think look at 5-6 years. It's amazing where you are, but the whole world is now also looking at you. Being the largest, and putting on the slide, we're the largest voluntary agreement, and you've just been touring, you get a podium in the US, you got a podium at our conference, and all other places looking, hey, what is Australia doing different? The same question we got a couple of years ago, hey, why is the Netherlands doing things different? And the next step is, and I'm very happy that you have the pillars of the CRC, the monitoring, the pact, and consumer campaign. I think that's exciting, and that's the opportunity to get all businesses involved, to get consumers involved, that you see consumer awareness rates getting up to like 80-90% of people that actually do something, for example, during all these interventions. So that's exciting. The next step, of course, is make sure that this movement will continue, that the policy framework, maybe with some inspiration from Europe, will be there, that it is like normal, not to waste any food, and to make sure that all these resources are being utilized. We know that it's financial benefit, we know the social benefit is crucial, and having this, let's say, okay, make sure that we care about our planet, we need all the resources for all the different destinations. That, in Australia, you see a change with the flooding, with the heat. I think the situation, it's a perfect storm here, so you're already well equipped to get to the next stage. But you need all the stakeholders across the whole supply chain on board. And I think a similar challenge that we have in the Netherlands is it's all starting more or less downstream. You have to work all the way up to the beginning of the supply chain. So get the producers also on board, because that's when you have the real impact. And I think that's a crucial step we have to take, and love to walk the talk and the journey with you on how you can do that here also.
Yeah, and it's certainly a strong focus for our organisation at the moment as well, particularly that horticulture area. Dana, I think you published one of the seminal pieces of work that I used to reference when I first got into this field, and that was back when you were with the Natural Defence Council, or maybe you can
close enough.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, but tell us about your food waste journey. And the other part to this question is, I've asked Toine what we're doing right and what we can improve. Where do you see America heading? You know, what are you doing right as a country? You know, we often look to America as you know, a source of innovation, but what are you doing right as a country, and what can you improve?
Yeah, well, my start on this journey was back in about 2010, and I was working on a sustainable agriculture project, and I was put on the waste committee, which really meant to look at plastics, because there's a lot of plastics in farming, and stumbled upon these numbers of how much food was going to waste in the US. And I just went, wow, how is this possible? You know, here we are trying to get farmers to be 5-10% more efficient with their water, but we're not even using half the food or 40% of the food. So that really led me to become obsessed really with the topic. And ultimately, I wrote a paper in 2012 that in some ways broke the story on how much food was going to the waste in the US. And really, I've been working on it ever since. And I did build out a program there at NRDC, which is now really focused on cities, and was involved in the beginning of ReFed as an organization as well. In terms of the US and where we're heading, you know, I think one thing we do well is what you guys were just talking about, which is we have a enhanced tax incentive for food donations, and that's been in place for a very long time. And so we actually do a pretty good, you know, a better job than we would be doing without it, let's say, on food donations. Certainly there's a lot more we can be doing. As you saw in that chart I put up, only about 2% of all surplus food is being donated. Now, not all of the rest of that 98% can be, but you know, I think we do a decent job on food donation. We have a very established system here. On the grocery side and up the supply chain. We could be doing a lot better on prepared foods. One thing that anyone who's been to the US will notice is that we have insane portion sizes, and they have increased quite a bit in the last 40 years or so. And so that's one thing I'd like to see us really paying more attention to, is how can we at least provide more flexible options for portions, so that if you don't want a giant sandwich, you actually can just order a half sandwich. So that's one thing you'll be seeing from us, is more activity around researching what does that mean for business models for restaurants? How do we make that something that's not scary for restaurants to offer? And how do we show that consumers really want that? The other thing you'll be seeing is hopefully a consumer campaign coming soon. And with the US Food Waste Pact, we really expect that more businesses will be paying a little bit more attention, hopefully scaling some of the solutions that we've seen scale really, really quickly lately. I mean, we've seen huge uptake of, for instance, apps like Too Good To Go. I saw them up on the screen before. And Flash Food is one in the US that helps either grocery stores or restaurants sell their food off at the last minute. I think those should be in every single restaurant. Why not, right? It's a complete win-win in every grocery store. So I'd really like to focus on how do we scale some of these things that are getting picked up quickly, but should just be everywhere. So that's one thing we're looking at as well.
Thank you. Look, is there any burning questions from the floor? Because I understand there's none that have come into the app that Costa mentioned at the start. Any burning? Lucky I prepared some earlier. Jeez. Adrian, is there a roving mic somewhere? I thought Costa was roving mic then, but he can just amplify. Sorry, I caught people off guard there.
Adrian Spencer from Empower Australia. We're the largest face-to-face food relief centre. We've given out over 3 million meals in the last few years and over 200 tonnes we've distributed just this year. Congratulations and thank you for the work that you've been doing on the tax incentive side. That is incredibly important. One of the flow-on challenges we're anticipating from that is how do we account and treat that. We're worried that there'll be a lot of people that might want to dump stuff. But that's okay as long as it works within our framework, but we can't find an accounting firm that can provide an audit process for us, because we're looking at, do we do it by volume or by weight? Whereabouts in the supply chain is it priced? So we've had to build our own system, and we're kind of thinking, well, if the compliance or regulators come knocking on our door and go, somebody's claimed they've given you this, it's a technical question, but it's going to be really important, and we can see that being a big issue. Is there any development or thought or process on that?
That's a perfect example of the sorts of issues that need to go into the submission and inquiry process, because it's one thing for the Parliamentary Budget Office to cost what this legislation might mean in terms of foregone revenue and what the social return on investment looks like, but unless we've got robust and rigorous processes sitting around it, it's doomed to fail. I think we've got a lot to learn from overseas jurisdictions and the work that ReFed's done in this space, but we need to make sure that there is confidence in those processes, because, you know, to go back to the really trivial stuff where this conversation started, you can't manage what you don't measure. And if we're not measuring accurately, then this thing falls over at the start. So we need to make sure that there are robust processes sitting underneath it. We're really thrilled that KPMG did a lot of the unlocking of what this needs to look like and the tax advice underpinning it. I hope there's more to come. But, let's be real. What if we build it and they come? What if this incentive really works? What if we unlock 100 million meals overnight? Have we got the infrastructure to manage that? Have we got the transport and logistics? So it's a complex beast, but we've got to start somewhere by building that legislative framework and then making sure we've got those processes underpinning. But yeah, make sure when you're writing that submission that you don't say it will fail because, but it would benefit from an amazing and robust system that is underpinning the measurement and management of the process.
Thank you. There's one here. Kat.
Oh, hello, Kat Heinrich, from Director at Rawtech. My question's for Toine Timmermans. I'm just over here, Toine.
Yeah, hi.
Hello. So my question's about the EU and the legislation over there. And you mentioned, I saw on your slide, you had the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. I'm sure I've got the acronym not quite right. But how important is that requirement for reporting by corporates in driving reducing food waste in Europe, and is that the type of thing we should have in Australia for mandatory reporting?
Good question, Kat, and pleasure to see you. You came to the Netherlands a couple of years, as I probably still remember. So you saw some of the examples of what businesses are actually in practice doing. And that's not the issue. The solutions are there, but it is like to create also the corporate and the strategy environment to act on this. And this is what has changed with this CSRD legislation, part of the whole package. It is mandatory for all companies to report since 2024. And I'm sure Yolanda, she's sitting almost next to you, she's one of the front runners in this area, and she will also tell a little bit and explain what it means for their company and how to utilize all of this new legislation to progress even faster. What we see is that the big retailers, the big manufacturers, they need to not only report, but they have set targets on carbon emissions. So many retailers in Europe have set emission targets, 45%, 55% reductions in line with the Green Deal and the Fit for 55 program. Personally, I think when they set those targets, they didn't realize what that meant for them. Being that 95 or 90% of their Scope 3 emissions is part of that commitment. So we see the shift in the last years that the refocus was on the big things in their operations to the big things in the food supply chain. That's the reason why I can show these figures, that retail figures are going down on food waste, that even meat consumption relatively is going down because of all these drivers. What I see is also that those companies that are making most progress use this legislative and reporting framework and their targets to change the culture within their organization. And to be honest, and that's where also the link to the financial systems come clear, those organizations that have linked their targets and bonus to sustainability targets are moving way faster than the others, because no one in higher management wants to let go of their bonus. So we see that some of these businesses are going so fast, but they cannot do it themselves. So if you look at food waste, that means look at how can we change behavior at consumers. That's why that date labeling commitment, we started working with that 7 years ago. There was an appetite to talk about it. There's a lot of talked about this topic as we do today, but now it was like, no, we need to do this because this will help us to meet our targets. And the same is true for asking all the suppliers, how well are you doing on your resources? Also, Yolanda will explain about what the consequence was for the whole potato sector. Like, we need to report, we need to know where we are. Bakery sectors, and at the end that will lead to transparency in the whole supply chain. So should you do that? Yes, tomorrow, because this is a game changer. But be sure that all the other things are also in place. So it's not just one thing you change, like a landfill tax increase. Make sure that the whole framework is set for purpose.
Great, thank you. I have been asked to wind up, and one thing I just want to remind you of is before you leave the room, please scan the QR code on your table. This new strategic business plan is now 16 pages. It started at 96 pages. It's a much better read now, I've got to say. And even on a flight between Adelaide and Melbourne, it's easily consumable. So no one's got an excuse not to read it in the coming weeks. Please grab a hard copy of the strategy on a page outside as well. We really want you to all get on board with the strategic business plan. Talk to us how you can be involved over the next couple of days. Thank you. Have a good morning tea.
It looks like you're away. Look, that's all right. I will push through. Now, I do need you for 1 second. As we take this break, I want to announce that there's a real treat for everyone. We're actually having an upcycled morning tea. This isn't just any morning tea, it's a showcase of delicious transformed products demonstrating the taste of less waste. Enjoy the delights from Gina's Table, Grainstone, Melons Australia, NutriV, Oz Harvest Ventures and Rescued Kitchen. Each of these amazing contributors has turned what might have been waste into something extraordinary. To our wonderful panel, Dana, Toine, Steve and Brianna, thanks for setting the tone for the next 2 days. There's so much to unpack. I had a couple of little analogies I've taken for it, but there's some caffeine-needing humans in the room and some morning tea out there for waiting, so I'll talk about that later. Enjoy morning tea, connect, and we'll see you back here in a little while.
Next we have Toine Timmermans. Toine has been on this journey with us for quite some time as well. Certainly he's been on the board from the very start, and he brings a huge amount of global expertise in to help us on our Australian journey. So Toine, over to you.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning, everybody. It's always a pleasure to be in Australia, and I would love to share some insights, hopefully some new insights on what's happening in the rest of the world. Steve also asked me to talk a little bit more, because we talked about the social economy always works, of course, and if you make the combination between social economy, tax incentive, that will work. But I think the next driver, and that's a game changer, especially in Europe, is how do we link that also with environmental impact and make sure that we have a framework that will drive every company, but also consumers, to act on using their resources better. Because it's already mentioned by Steven in the introduction video, about 10% of greenhouse gas emissions are related to the food that is produced and non-eaten. And that calculation is very simple. About 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions caused by human action is linked to our food system. And if we waste globally 1/3, that adds up to 10% of emissions that are produced and used for nothing, that we can all avoid. The interesting thing is also that if we look at waste reduction, these are some of the easy things we can change. So the other slide, or the other graph that I put on this slide is linked to work by Drawdown, a US-based organization, science-based, that looks at what are like the realistic solutions to mitigate climate change. And understanding all of these figures, it is for me not a surprise that food waste reduction, including moving to a more plant-based diets, are two of the top 3 solutions worldwide. Things that can easily be done, but how many people of you know about this? That these are actually far better and more impactful solutions than flying less, using electric cars, that would be on 50 in the top 100 list. These are the things we actually need to do that are easy and have the highest impact. And the figures are right on that. But it's of course to create awareness, but also you need to create the strategy and the policy background. And that's what I think Europe has been doing well. On food waste, we'll talk about it a little bit later. I guess the progress has not been as much as here in Australia in the last 5 years in many countries. But what has happened is that the legal and the policy framework in Europe has been set to progress and to accelerate in the coming years. 2 things I want to mention. Of course, we all know about the SDGs, but the SDGs, 12.3 that we all focus on, it's an aspiration, it's intentional. 50% reduction, everybody agrees, but if you don't meet it at the end, no consequences. For that reason, European Commission has now introduced binding targets. So every country needs to commit to these new binding targets. They are lower as the 50%, 30% consumer, 30% retail, 30% food service reduction, 10% manufacturing, 0% farmers. I think a big mistake, but we're working on that. But if countries don't meet that, that will have consequences. And I think that's a new part of the game. This is all linked to the European Green Deal that's been installed by the former president, Ursula von der Leyen, and she just got re-elected last week with the promise that she can continue this work. Part of that work is 55% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in 2030. Her new commitment is 90% reduction in 2040. And that has all been part of a new legislative processes on, for example, Green Deal Claims Directive. So no Green Deals allowed. That will also have consequences. Corporate sustainability and reporting directive. So what are the best and accepted ways, validated, how to report on what you as a business are doing on meeting those targets? Very important. And what is crucial in that, it is no longer only about what you do in your own operation, but it is talking about the responsibility of your whole supply chain. Technically, scope 3. Suppose you're a retailer, 95% of your emissions is scope 3. So it's not about your logistics, the cooling, it is about the products that you sell. Knowing that all these impacts are in the production side, consumer side, and end of life side, your responsibility is also there. And that is a game changer currently for European businesses. They need to act on this, and they need to act on these 2 things, more plant-based, reduce food waste in their supply chain, and that is what's happening at the moment. Validated, most companies have committed to the Science-Based Targets group, like this is the normal way of how we measure and how we report. We already heard nobody can solve food waste by themselves. We need new collaborations. Personally, I'm convinced that voluntary agreements, industry, working with governments, working with knowledge institutions, NGOs, that's the only way to solve this. I started to work on voluntary agreements around 2012, and we see that it is been starting to work more and more countries. This is a kind of overview that's presented on like where are really serious voluntary agreements taking place in all of the world, and specifically in Europe. So just a month ago, a new publication was published about what is happening with all the different voluntary agreements. If we look at the global map, we don't see that much activity. If you go a deep dive, you see there's a lot of things happening. Maybe not as mature as we would have hoped for, looking back 5-6 years ago, but they have a good basis to start to work. Now the whole policy context, the context is there to make things happen. A little bit about the Netherlands. I'm responsible for, with my organization, for running the national voluntary agreement called Food Waste Free United. And I think it's an example and still an inspiration for many on how to build such a movement. To build a movement with committed stakeholders, to make sure that the target, measure, act approach that we all hear about in this area is actually being followed. And measure means also monitoring. So also in this slide you see a group of organizations that on a voluntary basis report to us, we validate those and come up with, for example, sector benchmarks. More and more companies are following this process, and we see this will go from retail, big manufacturing, all the way upstream. So we get a full mapping of the full supply chain by reporting by companies themselves being validated by a third party. But it is also about how can we make sure that as a supply chain, as actors, we can reduce food waste at consumer level. Knowing that that's probably the biggest of the place where the most food waste happens in most countries. In the Netherlands, it's about 30%, but in many countries, 50% of food waste happens with consumers at home. So we have organized this national campaign and we see that it's working, but it only works if others, all different partners, take this campaign, for us it's the food waste free action, take this to make sure that all consumers are made easy to reduce waste and that they're known, they create awareness, create interventions, that they can actually very practically, easily change things at home. But the proof of the pudding at the end, why are we all doing this, is we want to achieve those targets. A couple of years ago, I was kind of like hesitant, are we sure that this works? And now I can say, yes, it works. The reduction at consumer level is, I think, impressive. 31% reduction since 2010. Our reference here, 2050, 23%. Still going down, but declining. We'll talk about that tomorrow. But what I think is important also, and retail in the Netherlands has been one of the leading, because 85% of retail reports to us already since 5-6 years in a row. We see now, confidently, they are on track on halving food waste way before 2030. And in other sectors, we see the front runners moving in the same directions. We don't see it at full sector level yet, but I'm quite sure that will follow. So I'm confident that if we can expand this model to the whole supply chain, this will work, and that the Netherlands will be, as was our ambition, will be one of the first countries in the world that can actually halve food waste. But we need more work in this area. What is also important, you create in this movement, you create like the like-minded and say, okay, what are the specific areas that we can set next steps together, create new coalitions and create new actions, how we make sure that next steps, and it will get more complex, the quick wins are all things, how make sure that next steps can be set. And this is one that we announced just a month ago, and that's a new coalition on date labeling. About 10% of consumers in the Netherlands, but I think this is a global thing, find it difficult to make a decision on what to do with a product that is about to extend shelf life on a date label. Because of this, these companies now made a commitment, and that's for retailers, on 50% of all their private label products, there will be the new icon, talking about look, smell, taste, so that will give all the consumers direct insight on what to do with that specific product, whether it's used by or best before. We need this large community of businesses, retailers, manufacturers to actually do this. But with this commitment, I'm quite sure we have solved another thing. And that's what it is all about, solving things and then go to the next one until you reach all sectors and until you reach the 50% reduction. But we also need, because I think the legal framework, policy framework in Europe is set. Of course, it needs to all be operated, executed, implemented. But we also need to be careful about some of the perverse incentives that are still there. Respect the food use hierarchy. Prevention is always best. Keeping resources in the food supply chain is something we have to look at. I think I counted 5-6 times here the word landfill. Why are we still landfilling here? Because that's a big reason for methane emissions, and that's something we could stop. by either increasing the levy to hundreds of euros or dollars, or just ban it like we've done in the Netherlands 25 years ago. But make sure that you don't allow to go to the next step, composting or anaerobic digestion. Make sure that you do it right based on what is the state of the art. So keep things in the supply chain. Don't go and compost and then say, okay, we do a little bit better. No, you should aim for the highest. Prevention and keep all the resources in the food supply chain. This food, feed, fuel competition in Europe is very happening at the moment. And that also has to do with rising energy prices. That also has to do with industry lobby in different areas. So we have to be careful, look at the fact, make sure that we use all the resources in the best way. That's one of the challenges we have in Europe. What's also another challenge, and I think we are experiencing that quite now at the moment, we see that in Australia, Europe is wetter than ever, and it's getting hotter this year than ever. So the wet means it will be more difficult to produce any crops or produce. So on the excess side, we need to be more agile, and we need to change the way food supply chains work and make sure that food security, what was there certain for the last 30 years, is no longer certain. So we need to use also this, what will be emerging and happening further, to use this also as a next thing to make sure that the whole supply chain, including the farmers, gets involved. Okay, let's look at how we can build this future supply chains and look and also on how we should work on climate change adaptation. That's the thing in Europe on the agenda, and that's what we need as an additional new step to make sure that we build a better food system. So thanks for your attention.